We're working on exercise 34.5, and the description here says display table contents. Write a program that displays the content for a given table as shown in figure 34.30a, which is the one on the left. You enter a table and click the show contents button to display the table contents in the area. So in other words, you will pick the name of the table and then you'll click show contents. If you guys are interested, I probably should have offered this as extra credit. If you wanted to put a drop down box in that one and try to get it to dynamically pull it up from your database, you can try that one too. It's not much of a stretch once you get the first part working. It will of course pull from that same database. Now I have my database running up on Kronos, and what's always kind of a good thing to do when you're working on a project like this that's interfacing with the database is to have your database management system available for you so that you can actually go look at the database and see what you're supposed to see. So this is the enrollment table, and you can see that all the enrollment table holds is a bunch of social security numbers, course IDs, date registered, and grades. So when you compare it to what's in the output here, that's what's going on. So we have a few different things that we have to create. Obviously we need a label, text field, a button, and then an area of the screen where we can do some output. So it's always smart when you're doing the graphical application to kind of like start wrestling with the graphical components first. Once again, I'm just going to add this to my NetBeans project that's already going. I know that probably in the first homework video that's out there we were working in Eclipse, but at some point we decided here in class to try a few different tools, including IntelliJ and NetBeans. And right now we are working in NetBeans, but the same principles really apply in any one of those tools once you have that project going. And the reason that I'm choosing to work within the same project structure is because the MySQL database connection component is already present, so I don't have to wrestle with that at all. So I'm just going to go to the root of the project here, and I'm going to create a new Java class, and I'll call this one exercise 34_5. I'm just going to get rid of all these little default comments here and start doing all the standard stuff. So we're going to say extends application, add our library, still trying to figure out how NetBeans handles this. Let's just type it in. Basically we need the override and the start method with closing curly brackets. Let's add the library for the stage. Takes care of the override. We are also going to need a main method. Let's just throw that in right away. Let's put that down here. As always, we're going to need to have a stage and a scene and all that stuff, so you may as well put that probably near the bottom of the start method somewhere. I'll just clean up all my tab stops here. Add the library for scene. Made me tab over again. Alright, you can see here that I was using some sort of a pane. The question is, what kind of pane was I using? So let's take a look at what we're going to wrestle with here and figure out what is going to make the most sense structure-wise to use. So from what I'm seeing here, I could probably get by with a border pane again. This could be the center section, and then this could be the top section, and then the top section could probably contain a H box to hold all three of these items. So that's what I'm going to proceed to build. So I'll start by building the border pane. So I'll do that right here. And since it's already, my scene here already has a thing called pane, I'll just call it pane and make it a new border pane, empty parens. That needs a library, of course. And then we also need to figure out where the stuff is going to sit in terms of structure. So the border pane is going to be the one that holds everything. In the center of the border pane, we have this kind of this table output. And then the top, we already decided we're going to do an H box. So I can actually go ahead and do this right away. So I can set the top and put it in H box, and I'll just come up here and create an H box. So just create a simple H box, call it H box to match names, add the library, and then we're going to need to put the stuff inside that H box. And what we're going to do is we need to have a label, a text field, and a button. So let's create those objects. And those objects, I'm actually going to create those up above the start method so they're accessible to everything. So I'll create a text field. We need a label to go with it, and actually I probably should have done that one first. I like keeping them in order if I can. And then we also need a button. All right, now since we have all three of those things created, now we can add those things to the H box. So I can do a get children with the H box. So let's do that. So we're going to add a new label. And you see what I did here is, this is by virtue of copy paste. So this status field is going to be used elsewhere. I was instantiating a new label in place. Adding the table text field and the button. And then we should probably do a little bit of alignment on that too. So let's make sure that that positions to the center. NetBeans is a little goofy. All right, so we got that part taken care of. Now, since I already added that label for status, and really that status, I'm going to have that actually appear at the bottom of the screen. So it's going to be in the bottom part of the border pane. We also need to create this area in the middle, and that's called a text area. That's a separate type of structure, so you don't want to use a text field for that. Let's go ahead and create a text area. It needs a library. And then we should also create something to hold our statement for SQL. And as we've been doing in other applications, instead of using specific SQL libraries, I'm just going to kind of throw the wildcard in there to cover all of them, so I don't have to worry about it. All right, next thing that we're going to do is finish off these border pane areas. So I set the top to be the H box. I'm going to put that status label at the bottom. And then I also need to set the center area and what I'm doing here is kind of a combination of techniques. I'm using an object called a scroll pane, and the scroll pane allows us to basically get the little scroll bars on the side if the content starts to exceed the bounds of the text area. So I'm using the text area, and that'll get as big as it needs to be, and then the scroll pane allows the contents to scroll if they exceed. And that's just instantiated in place. All right, so we do have the visual elements all set. So save your work if you haven't yet. And the next thing that we should do is initialize the database. Now, if you remember from previous applications, we just very simply have a separate method called Initialize Database that I just copied in. Something I already had existing. Normally I would clean up the code here a little bit. I know we're pressed for time at this point. That one can stay there. See, I got little comments in here too. Just making sure my curlies match up there. Right? And now that we've created an initialized database, I'm going to call on it just like we have before. It just forms the connection. So you got your driver, same exact thing that we were doing in the previous application. So it's complete copy paste. Last thing we really need to do is to get the button to work. So I'm going to set up an event handler for that, and I'll do that right below the initialization step. So I have the show contents button, a little lambda event handler, and then we have a show contents method that we have yet to create. So we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to create something called show contents. We'll just put it right down here, just below the closing, or just above the closing curly, and we're going to make that a private void show contents, fresh set of curly brackets, and then we have a little bit of work to do here. So this is really where most of the work in the application is. Most of the rest of it is just setup. So I think you guys got that part of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to create a string that's going to hold information for a query. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to allow the user to type in the table name, and then we're going to get that text from the field. All right, so very simple little string variable. And then we're going to do a try catch. So let's just type those two parts in right away. Inside the try, we're going to set up a variable for our query. And all we're going to do is we're going to select everything from whatever table it is that we list. All right, that's going to be a really easy query to write. We do need to have a result set in place that is going to receive the results of the query. Remember, that just basically holds a table of information that comes back. And then one thing that's new to us is this thing where we're actually pulling back what they call the metadata from the table, which in this case is the column headers from the table. All right, and that's just another method that runs that does that. But one thing I forgot to do here with my catch is I should probably put it in an exception handler. So let's call it SQL exception, and I'll just call it X. That's why it was flagging red. Right, now that we have that stuff set for the query, here's where the work begins. And when we're going to be traversing a set of information that comes back from a database, a loop works really well for that, right? Because the information repeats, so we're just going to run basically a for loop. So I'm going to set up a for loop, and we'll put in a counter called I that starts at 1, and we're going to run that as long as I is less than or equal to basically the result set of the column count. So that looks like this, and what I'm doing here is I'm copy pasting so I don't mistype it. And then we're just going to do an I++ to increment. I am putting in curlies for the for loop, although since it's one single statement I'm actually putting in here, you could probably skip it. And then the statement that will pull it back is this. So what it does is it takes the result set that we have pulled back, and then it adds to it through an append text. First of all, notice it gets the column name, and then they just kind of picked an arbitrary number of spaces to separate it. So they probably sat there and wrestled with it until they got just the right number. The other thing that we'll do is after the loop is done, we'll force it to put in a new line. So this is just a simple little brute force new line. Now this first part is for pulling back the column. So the column headers, it's going to pull back each column header one at a time and put spaces in between it and put it up on the screen. Then it creates a new line for us. Then we are going to put in a while statement that's going to help us iterate through. In fact, I have that printed as a comment here, so I'll just grab that also. So this is actually going to iterate through the records that are returned. And you can see we're using that result set thing, right? Just like we did before, so that's nothing new. But we're going to put a for loop inside of this to actually do the work. So watch what happens here. So very similar to the previous syntax, in fact identical to the previous syntax, we're going to go through and looking at the column count. So we're counting the columns and then pulling back the pieces of information one at a time. And as we add that stuff there, we are going to output the results. But in this time, instead of outputting the column name, we are going to output the object that we're pulling back. So whatever information is actually in the result set. Now, one thing that's interesting here is this is actually the whole for loop. Really, probably not a bad idea to put curly brackets around it. I'm a big fan of doing that, even though Java, if there's only one statement, remember it doesn't need them. I think people forget that. That's why I like to put them in. And then also add a new line after each result set. So it's going to go through, get the column count, let's say 5 columns, 10 columns, 20 columns, doesn't matter. See what we're doing here? It's dynamic. So if I pick a table that's got 20 columns, it'll iterate through all of them. And then all the records. And then after it does that, it will do a new line and then continue and keep doing it. As far as a catch statement, I'm just going to have it do, you know, you want to send something to the console or to the status field, go for it, but otherwise I'm just going to let it throw an error message. And that's basically the program, folks, in its entirety. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run it, and hopefully it loads up and runs just fine. And of course, what's it doing? Running the first application again. So once again, this is true in most of these IDEs, is I'm going to run this particular file, not all of them. So one of the tables that we were working with was the staff table. So I remember that, so I'm just going to grab it, and I know it's spelled just that way, so Looks like it worked. So it created, it's not the prettiest of things, right? But it does work. You know, I would probably look at using some type of output mechanism that's different, but what's the one they used in the example? Enrollment. Notice how it just adds it right to the bottom of that. Yes, we could write a clear button. Yeah, you could write a clear button. And it really doesn't take that much more if you want to switch it over to a combo box and dynamically pull in tables. And you could do a whole lot more with like the output that comes back too. All right, folks, we are all done, and that ends this video.